Hello. Hello, everyone. We're getting started. I'm a little bit late today, unfortunately, because I was busy managing some stuff for college loan applications, and so and so. I also don't have water with me, which I'll go get in a moment. I'm just waiting to find my own stream. It says that I streamed this 3 hours ago. I'm not quite sure. I didn't schedule this for like the past, did I? No. We're in the same like time stream. It's all good. Once it pops up, then I'll be able to get the link out and we will begin the reading of Man and His Symbols, Carl Jung's chapter. And we are about to get started. Alright. Hello, Long John Jimmy. Welcome. How are you doing? I'm going to begin the reading. Feel free to just chat along. I'll try and strike a balance between reading and paying attention to the audience, and hopefully everything will do perfectly. I'm doing pretty good today. I had a really kind of mystical experience almost today. I went out for a walk and it was almost like a symbolic anxiety attack where I literally couldn't walk anymore. It felt like my lower back just kept getting paralyzed every time somebody looked at me. It was like the idea of like the look, like if you've heard of Jean-Paul Sartre's idea of like things are not the same once you perceive them. Um, I was experiencing this to like the maximum, and it was just every time somebody like looked at me, or even I thought that somebody was looking at me, I immediately like paralyzed. I felt like my legs seized up. I couldn't walk, and it was a really, really humbling experience to be honest. Because just being out there so vulnerable in front of like all these eyes is like really hard. It's I felt like I was at the mercy of nature and not in control of my own being, and I had no choice but to like relax into it because any attempt I made to fight it just made it worse. And it was hard. I wasn't sure at some points that I was going to make it home because there are times like I just like would just freeze up, and I had to like sit down for a little bit and just take just takes time to relax and let go of the tension. But once I finally made it home, uh, I felt a lot better. Almost like something was like, something deep inside of me got purged out of, like, there was some really deep fear that I must have been hiding away that surfaced at that time, and I got a glimpse of it. I don't even think it was the full, but I walked into it as much as I could. Well, it's really interesting. I've had somewhat similar situations of anxiety, but not to that degree. Yeah, this was probably the worst I've ever had too. It was crazy. Um, I often feel ashamed about like these kinds of experiences where like anxiety starts to mess up my body and alter the way that like I am operating, so I feel kind of guilty. I don't know how like I'm inflecting upon other people, and because I know in my own head that other people's anxiety, sometimes I take it the wrong way and I feel like they I take it personally, you know? That's silly. So like I want to be able to be streamlined in a way that I'm not causing inflections that may make people feel worse. But at the same time, I have to relax because there's no way to be the perfect mirror. You can't. You just have to relax. You just melt into it. I think that's what I was mostly learning, is that I have to just cool it and let it be, because whatever idea I have of progression, I'm always going to subvert my own expectations when I grow. It's always going to be something new and unknown. It's always going to be something that I did not expect. So I'll just allow the unexpected to manifest. And I guess with that, I feel ready to start reading. I'll do a little bit of a refresher. Just I'll read like the page that we left off of. Very often, dreams have a definite, evidently purposeful structure, indicating an underlying idea or intention, though as a rule, the latter is not immediately comprehensible. Hold on. One second. I just want to get water, and then we're gonna be good. Now I will be clear. I have some thoughts about that, and I will share later, so I can do them justice and not put off your reading. Thank you, Long John Jimmy, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts. I think it'll be very exciting. I think I just put like my water bottle in front of my camera, which is not very wise. It should be better now. There I am. Alright. Very often, dreams have a definite, evidently purposeful structure, indicating an underlying idea or intention, though as a rule, the latter is not immediately comprehensible. I therefore began to consider whether one should pay more attention to the actual form and content of a dream, rather than allowing free association to lead one off through a train of ideas to complexes that could easily be reached by other means. This new thought was a turning point in the development of my psychology. It meant that I gradually gave up following associations that led far away from the text of a dream. I chose to concentrate rather on the associations to the dream itself, believing that the latter expressed something specific that the unconscious was trying to say. The change in my attitude towards dreams involved a change of method. A new technique was one that could take account of all the various wider aspects of a dream. A story told by the conscious mind has a beginning, a development, and an end, but the same is not true of a dream. Its dimensions in time and space are quite different. To understand it, you must examine it from every aspect. Just as you may take an unknown object in your hands, turn it over and over until you are familiar with every detail of its shape. Perhaps I have now said enough to show how I came increasingly to disagree with free association as Freud first employed it. I wanted to keep as close as possible to the dream itself, and to exclude all irrelevant ideas that associations and to exclude all the irrelevant ideas and associations that it might evoke. True, these could lead one toward the complexes of a patient, but I had a far-reaching purpose in mind than the discovery of complexes that cause neurotic disturbances. There are many other means by which these can be identified. The psychologist, for instance, can get all the hints he needs by using word association tests, by asking the patient what he associates to a given set of words, and by studying his responses. But to know and understand the psychic life process of an individual's whole personality, it is important to realize that his dreams and their symbolic images have a much more important role to play. Almost everyone knows, for example, that there is an enormous variety of images by which the sexual act can be symbolized, or one might say represented in the form of an allegory. Each of these images can lead, by a process of association, to the idea of sexual intercourse and to specific complexes that any individual may have about his own sexual attitudes. But one could just as well unearth such complexes by daydreaming on a set of indecipherable Russian letters. I was thus led to the assumption that a dream can contain some message other than the sexual allegory, that it does so for definite reasons. To illustrate this point, a man may dream of inserting a key in a lock, of wielding a heavy stick, or of breaking down a door with a battering ram. Each of these can be regarded as a sexual allegory, but the fact that his unconscious for its own purposes has chosen one of these specific images, it may be the key, the stick, or the battering ram, is also of major significance. The real task is to understand why the key has been preferred to the stick, or the stick to the ram. And sometimes this might even lead one to discover that it is not the sexual act at all that is represented, but some quite different psychological point. From this line of reasoning, I concluded that only the material that is clearly and visibly part of a dream should be used in interpreting it. The dream has its own limitation. Its specific form itself tells us what belongs to it and what leads away from it. While free association lures one away from that material in a kind of zigzag line, the method I evolved is more like a circumambulation whose center is the dream picture. I work all around the dream picture and disregard every attempt that the dreamer makes to break away from it. Time and time again in my professional work, I've had to repeat the words, "Let's get back to your dream. What does the dream say?" For instance, a patient of mine dreamed of a drunken and disheveled vulgar woman. In the dream, it seemed that this woman was his wife, though in real life, his wife was totally different. On the surface, therefore, the dream was shockingly untrue, and the patient immediately rejected it as dream nonsense. If I, as his doctor, had let him start a process of association, he would inevitably have tried to get as far away as possibly from the unpleasant suggestion of his dream. In that case, he would have ended with one of his staple complexes, a complex possibly that had nothing to do with his wife, and we should have learned nothing about the special meaning of this particular dream. What then was his unconscious trying to convey by such an obviously untrue statement? Clearly, it somehow expressed the idea of a degenerate female who was closely connected with the dreamer's life, but since the projection of this image onto his wife was unjustified and factually untrue, I had to look elsewhere before I found out what this repulsive image represented. In the Middle Ages, long before the physiologists demonstrated that by reason of our glandular structure, there are both male and female elements in all of us. It was said that every man carries a woman within himself. It is this female element in every male that I have called the anima. This feminine aspect is essentially a certain inferior kind of relatedness to the surroundings, and particularly to woman, which is kept carefully concealed from others as well as from oneself. In other words, through an individual's visible personality may seem quite normal, he may well be concealing from others, or even from himself, the deplorable condition of the woman within. That was the case with this particular patient. His female side was not nice. His dream was actually saying to him, "You are in some respects behaving like a degenerate female," and thus gave him an appropriate shock. An example of this kind, of course, must not be taken as evidence that the unconscious is concerned with moral injunctions. The dream was not telling the patient to behave better, but was simply trying to balance the lopsided nature of the conscious mind, which was maintaining the fiction that he was a perfect gentleman throughout. It is easy to understand why dreamers tend to ignore and even deny the message of their dreams. Consciousness naturally resists anything unconscious and unknown. I have already pointed out the existence among primitive peoples of what anthropologists call misoneism, a deep and superstitious fear of novelty. It's a new word for me. The primitives manifest all the reactions of the wild animal against untoward events, but civilized man reacts to new ideas in much the same way, erecting psychological barriers to protect himself from the shock of facing something new. This can easily be observed in any individual's reaction to his own dreams when obliged to admit a surprising thought. Many pioneers in philosophy, science, and even literature have been victims of the innate conservatism of the contemporaries. Psychology is one of the youngest of the sciences because it attempts to deal with the workings of the unconscious. It has inevitably encountered misoneism in extreme form. Next chapter. Past and future in the unconscious. So far, I've been sketching... Hold on, I'm just going to get a drink of water real quick. Alright, we good. So far, I have been sketching some of the principles on which I have approached the problem of dreams. For when we want to investigate man's faculty to produce symbols, dreams prove to be the most basic and accessible material for this purpose. The two fundamental points in dealing with dreams are these. First, the dream should be treated as a fact, about which one must take no previous assumptions, except that it somehow makes sense, and second, the dream is a specific expression of the unconscious. One could scarcely put these principles more modestly. No matter how low anyone's opinion of the unconscious may be, he must concede that it is worth investigating. The unconscious is at least on a level with the louse, or mosquito, which, after all, enjoys the honest interest of the entomologist. If somebody with little experience and knowledge of dreams thinks that dreams are just chaotic occurrences without meaning, he is at liberty to do so. But if one assumes that they are normal events, which as a matter of fact they are, one is bound to consider that they are either causal, that there is a rational cause for their existence, or in a certain way purposive, or both. Let us look now a little more closely at the ways in which the conscious and unconscious contents of the mind are linked together. Take an example with which everyone is familiar. Suddenly, you can't remember what you were going to say next, though a moment ago the thought was perfectly clear. Or perhaps you are about to introduce a friend and his name escapes you as you are about to utter it. You say you can't remember it. In fact, though, the thought has become unconscious, or at least momentarily separated from consciousness. We find the same phenomena with our senses. If we listen to a continuous note on the fringe of audibility, the sound seems to stop at regular intervals and then start again. Such oscillations are due to a periodic decrease and increase in one's attention, not to any change in the note. But when something slips out of our consciousness, it does not cease to exist, any more than a car that has disappeared around a corner has vanished into thin air. It is simply out of sight. Just as we may later see the car again, so we come across thoughts that were temporarily lost to us. Thus, part of the unconscious consists of a multitude of temporarily obscured thoughts, impressions, and images that, in spite of being lost, continue to influence our conscious minds. A man who is distracted or absent-minded will walk across the room to fetch something. He stops, seemingly perplexed. He has forgotten what he was after. His hands grope about among the objects on the table as if he were sleepwalking. He is oblivious of his original purpose, yet he is unconsciously guided by it. Then he realizes what it is he wants. His unconscious has prompted him. If you observe the behavior of a neurotic person, you can see him doing many things that he appears to be doing consciously and purposefully. Yet if you ask him about them, you will discover that he is either unconscious of them or has something quite different in mind. He hears and does not hear. He sees, yet is blind. He knows and is ignorant. Such examples are so common that the specialist soon realizes that the unconscious contents of the mind behave as if they were conscious, and that you can never be sure in such cases whether thought, speech, or action is conscious or not. It is this kind of behavior that makes so many physicians dismiss statements by hysterical patients as utter lies. Such persons certainly produce more untruths than most of us, but lie is scarcely the right word to use. In fact, their mental state causes an uncertainty of behavior because their consciousness is liable to unpredictable eclipse by an interference from the unconscious. Even their skin sensations may reveal similar fluctuations of awareness. At one moment, the hysterical person may feel a needle prick in his arm. At the next, it may pass unnoticed. If his attention can be focused on a certain point, the whole of his body can be completely anesthetized until the tension that causes this blackout of the senses has been relaxed. Sense perception is then immediately restored. All the time, however, he has been unconsciously aware of what was happening. The physician can see this process quite clearly when he hypnotizes such a patient. It is easy to demonstrate that the patient has been aware of every detail. The prick in the arm or the remark made during an eclipse of consciousness can be recalled as accurately as if there had been no anesthesia or forgetfulness. I recall a woman who was once admitted to the clinic in a state of complete stupor. When she recovered consciousness next day, she knew who she was but did not know where she was, how or why she had come there, or even the date. Yet after I had hypnotized her, she had told me why she had fallen ill, how she had got to the clinic, and who had admitted her. All these details could have been verified. She was even able to tell the time at which she had been admitted, because she had seen a clock in the entrance hall. Under hypnosis, her memory was as clear as if she had been completely conscious all of the time. When we discuss such matters, we usually have to draw on evidence supplied by clinical observation. For this reason, many critics assume that the unconscious in all its subtle manifestations belong solely to the sphere of psychopathology. They consider any expression of the unconscious as something neurotic or psychotic, which has nothing to do with a normal mental state. But neurotic phenomena are by no means the products exclusively of disease. They are normal occurrences. It is only because they are exaggerations that they are more obvious than their normal counterparts. Hysterical symptoms can be observed in all normal persons, but they are so slight that they usually pass unnoticed. Forgetting, for instance, is a normal process in which certain conscious ideas lose their specific energy because one's attention has been deflected. When interest turns elsewhere, It leaves in shadow the things with which one was previously concerned, just as a searchlight lights upon a new area by leaving another in darkness. This is unavoidable, for consciousness can only keep a few images in full clarity at one time, and even this clarity fluctuates. But the forgotten ideas have not ceased to exist. Although they cannot be reproduced at will, they are present in a subliminal state, just beyond the threshold of recall, from which they can rise again spontaneously at any time, often after many years of apparently total oblivion. I am speaking here. Yeah, book club, let's go! Glad you're here, Rad. I'm speaking here of things we have consciously seen or heard and subsequently forgotten. But we all see, hear, smell, and taste many things without noticing them at the time, either because our attention is deflected or because the stimulus to our senses is too slight to leave a conscious impression. The unconscious, however, has taken note of them, and the subliminal sense perception plays a significant part in our everyday lives without realizing it. They influence the way in which we react to both events and people. An example of this that I found particularly revealing was provided by a professor who had been walking in the country with one of his pupils, absorbed in serious conversation. Suddenly, he noticed that his thoughts were being interrupted by an unexpected flow of memories from his early childhood. He could not account for this distraction. Nothing in what had been said seemed to have any connection with these memories. On looking back, he saw that he had been walking past a farm when the first of these childhood recollections had surged up in his mind. He suggested to his pupil that they should walk back to the point where the fantasies had begun. Once there, he noticed the smell of geese, and instantly he realized that it was this smell that had touched off the flow of memories. In his youth, he had lived on a farm where geese were kept, and their characteristic smell had left a lasting, though forgotten, impression. As he passed the farm, on his walk, he had noticed the smell subliminally, and this unconscious perception had called back long-forgotten experiences of his childhood. The perception was subliminal because the attention was engaged elsewhere, and the stimulus was not strong enough to deflect it and to reach consciousness directly. Yet it had brought up the forgotten memories. Such a cue or trigger effect can explain the onset of neurotic symptoms as well as more benign memories when a sight, smell, or sound recalls a circumstance in the past. A girl, for instance, may be busy in her office, apparently in good health and spirits. A moment later, she develops a blinding headache and shows other signs of distress. Without consciously noticing it, she has heard the foghorn of a distant ship, and this has unconsciously reminded her of an unhappy parting with a lover whom she has been doing her best to forget. Aside from normal forgetting, Freud has described several cases that involve the forgetting of disagreeable memories that one is only too ready to lose. As Nietzsche, I think that's how you pronounce his name, remarked, "Where pride is insistent enough, memory prefers to give way." Thus, among the lost memories, we encounter not a few who owe their subliminal state and their incapacity to be voluntarily reproduced to their disagreeable and incompatible nature. The psychologist calls these repressed contents. A case in point might be that of a secretary who is jealous of one of her employees' associates. She habitually forgets to invite this person to meetings, though the name is clearly marked on the list she is using. But if challenged on the point, she simply says she forgot or was interrupted. She never admits, not even to herself, the real reason for her omission. Many people mistakenly overestimate the role of willpower and think that nothing can happen to their minds that they do not decide and intend. But one must learn to discriminate carefully between intentional and unintentional contents of the mind. The former are derived from the ego personality. The latter, however, arrives from a source that is not identical with the ego, but is its other side. It is this other side that would have made the secretary forget the invitations. There are many reasons why we forget things that we have noticed or experienced, and there are just as many ways in which they may be recalled to mind. An interesting example is that of cryptomnesia, or concealed recollection. An author may be writing steadily to a preconceived plan, working out an argument, or developing the line of a story, when suddenly he runs off at a tangent. Perhaps a fresh idea has occurred to him, or a different image, or a whole new subplot. If you ask him what prompted the digression, he will not be able to tell you. He may not even have noticed the change, though he has now produced material that is entirely fresh and apparently unknown to him before. Yet it can sometimes be shown convincingly that what he has written bears a striking similarity to the work of another author, a work that he believes he has never seen. Nietzsche. Thank you, Long John Jimmy. Nietzsche. And speaking of Nietzsche, I myself found a fascinating example of this in Nietzsche's book, Thus Spake Zarathustra, where the author reproduces almost word for word an incident reported in a ship's log for the year 1686. By sheer chance, I had read this seaman's yarn in a book published about 1835, half a century before Nietzsche wrote. And when I found... Hold on, I'm parsing. And when I found the similar passage in Thus Spake Zarathustra, I was struck by its peculiar style, which was different from Nietzsche's usual language. I was convinced that Nietzsche must also have seen the old book, though he made no reference to it. I wrote to his sister, who was still alive, and she confirmed that she and her brother had in fact read the book together when he was 11 years old. I think, from the context, it is inconceivable that Nietzsche had any idea that he was plagiarizing this story. I believe that 50 years later it had unexpectedly slipped into focus in his conscious mind. In this type of case, there is genuine, if unrealized, recollection. Much the same sort of thing may happen to a musician who has heard a peasant tune or a popular song in childhood and finds it cropping up as the theme of a symphonic movement that he is composing in adult life. An idea or an image has moved back from the unconscious into the conscious mind. What I have so far said about the unconscious is no more than a cursory sketch of the nature and functioning of this complex part of the human psyche, but it should have indicated this kind of subliminal material from which the symbols of our dreams may be spontaneously produced. This subliminal material can consist of all urges, impulses, and intentions, all perceptions and intuitions, all rational or irrational thoughts, conclusions, inductions, deductions, and premises, and all varieties of feelings. Any or all of these can take the form of partial, temporary, or constant unconsciousness. Such material has mostly become unconscious because, in a manner of speaking, there is no room for it in the conscious mind. Some of one's thoughts lose their emotional energy and become subliminal. That is to say, they no longer receive so much of our conscious attention, because they have come to seem uninteresting or irrelevant, or because there is some reason why we wish to push them out of sight. It is in fact normal and necessary for us to forget in this fashion, in order to make room in our conscious minds for new impressions and ideas. If this did not happen, everything we experience would remain above the threshold of consciousness and our minds would become impossibly cluttered. This phenomena is so widely recognized today that most people who know anything about psychology take it for granted. But just as conscious contents can vanish into the unconscious, new contents which have never yet been conscious can arise from it. One may have an inkling, for instance, that something is on the point of breaking into consciousness, that something is in the air, or that one smells a rat, or is on the tip of the tongue. The discovery that the unconscious is no mere depository of the past, but is also full of germs of future psychic situations and ideas led me to my own new approach to psychology. A great deal of controversial discussion has arisen around this point, But it is a fact that in addition to memories from a long distant conscious past, completely new thoughts and creative ideas can also present themselves from the unconscious. Thoughts and ideas that have never been conscious before. They grow up from the dark depths of the mind like a lotus and form a most important part of the subliminal psyche. We find this in everyday life, where dilemmas are sometimes solved by the most surprising new propositions. Many artists, philosophers, and even scientists owe some of their best ideas to inspirations that appear suddenly from the unconscious. The ability to reach a rich vein of such material and to translate it effectively into philosophy, literature, music, or scientific discovery is one of the hallmarks of what is commonly called genius. We can find clear proof of this fact in the history of science itself. For example, the French mathematician Poincaré and the chemist Kekulé owed important scientific discoveries, as they themselves admit, to sudden pictorial revelations from the unconscious. The so-called mystical experience of the French philosopher Descartes involved a similar sudden revelation in which he saw in a flash the order of all sciences. The British author Robert Louis Stevenson had spent years looking for a story that would fit his strong sense of man's double being when the plot of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was suddenly revealed to him in a dream. Later, I shall describe in more detail how such material arises from the unconscious, and I shall examine the form in which it is expressed. At the moment, I simply want to point out that the capacity of the human psyche to produce such new material is particularly significant when one is dealing with dream symbolism. For I have found again and again in my professional work that the images and ideas that dreams contain cannot possibly be explained solely in terms of memory. They express new thoughts that have never yet reached the threshold of consciousness. The function of dreams. I have gone into some detail about the origin of our dream life because it is the soil from which most symbols originally grow. Unfortunately, dreams are difficult to understand. As I have already pointed out, a dream is quite difficult. I've made an error, sorry. As I have already pointed out, a dream is quite unlike a story told by the conscious mind. In everyday life, one thinks out what one wants to say, selects the most telling way of saying it, and tries to make one's remarks logically coherent. For instance, an educated person will seek to avoid a mixed metaphor because it may give a muddled impression of his point. But dreams have a different texture. Images that seem contradictory and ridiculous crowd in on the dreamer, and the normal sense of time is lost, and commonplace things can assume a fascinating or threatening aspect. It may seem strange that the unconscious mind should order its material so differently from the seemingly disciplined pattern that we can impose on our thoughts in waking life. Yet anyone who stops for a moment to recall a dream will be aware of this contrast, which is, in fact, one of the main reasons why the ordinary person finds dreams so hard to understand. They do not make sense in terms of his normal waking experiences, and he therefore is inclined either to disregard them or to confess that they baffle him. Perhaps it may be easier to understand this point if we first realize the fact that the ideas with which we deal in our apparently disciplined waking life are by no means as precise as we like to believe. On the contrary, their meaning and their emotional significance for us becomes more imprecise the more closely we examine them. The reason for this is that anything we have heard or experienced can become subliminal, that is to say, can pass into the unconscious. And even what we retain in our conscious mind and can reproduce at will has acquired an unconscious undertone that will color the idea each time it is recalled. Our unconscious impressions, in fact, quickly assume an element of unconscious meaning that is physically significant for us, though we are not consciously aware of the existence of this subliminal meaning or of the way in which it both extends and confuses the conventional meaning. Of course, such psychic undertones differ from one person to another. Each of us receives any abstract or general notion in the context of the individual mind, and we therefore understand and apply it in our individual ways. When in conversation, I use any such terms as state, money, health, or society, I assume that my listeners understand more or less the same thing I do, but the phrase more or less makes my point. Each word means something slightly different to each person, even among those who share the same cultural background. The reason for this variation is that a general notion is received into an individual context and is therefore understood and applied in a slightly individual way, and the difference of meaning is naturally greatest when people have widely different social, political, religious, or psychological experiences. As long as concepts are identical with mere words, the variation is almost imperceptible and plays no practical role, but when an exact definition or a careful explanation is needed, one can occasionally discover the most amazing variations, not only in the purely intellectual understanding of the term, but particularly in its emotional tone and its application. As a rule, these variations are subliminal and therefore never realized. One may tend to dismiss such differences as redundant or expendable nuances of meaning that have little relevance to everyday needs. But the fact they exist shows that even the most matter-of-fact contents of consciousness have a penumbra of uncertainty around them. Even the most carefully defined philosophical or mathematical concepts, which we are sure does not contain more than we have put into it, is nevertheless more than we assume. It is a psychic event, and as such partly unknowable. The very numbers you use in counting are more than you take them to be. They are at the same time mythological elements. For the Pythagoreans, they were even divine. But you are certainly unaware of this when you use numbers for a practical purpose. Every concept in our conscious mind, in short, has its own psychic associations. While such associations may vary in intensity according to the relative importance of the concept to our whole personality, or according to the other ideas and even complexes to which it is associated in our unconscious, they are capable of changing the normal character of that concept. It may even become something quite different as it drifts below the level of consciousness. These subliminal aspects of everything that happens to us may seem to play very little part in our daily lives, but in dream analysis, where the psychologist is dealing with expressions of the unconscious, they are very relevant. For they are almost the invisible roots of our conscious thoughts. That is why commonplace objects or ideas can assume such powerful psychic significance in a dream that we may awake seriously disturbed in spite of having dreamed or nothing worse than a locked room or a missed train. The images produced in dreams are much more picturesque and vivid than the concepts and experiences that are their waking counterparts. One of the reasons for this is that, in a dream, such concepts can express their unconscious meaning. In our conscious thoughts, we restrain ourselves within the limits of rational statements that are much less colorful because we have stripped them of most of their psychic associations. I recall one dream of my own that I found difficult to interpret. In this dream, a certain man was trying to get behind me and jump on my back. I knew nothing of this. I knew nothing of this man except that I was aware that he had somehow picked up a remark that I had made and had twisted it into a grotesque travesty of my meaning, and I could not see the connection between this fact and his connection. My apologies. But I could not see the connection between this fact and his attempts in the dream to jump on me. In my professional life, however, it has often happened that someone has misrepresented what I have said, like I am doing right now. So often that I have scarcely bothered to wonder whether this kind of misrepresentation makes me angry. Now there is a certain value in keeping a conscious control over one's emotional reactions, and this I soon realized was the point the dream had made. Hold on, I'm composing myself again. If you guys have any thoughts, feel free to let them let them ride. It's definitely blowing my mind. One could say that this. Oh wait, no, I don't think I was that far ahead. Now, there's a certain value in keeping a conscious control over one's emotional reactions, and this I soon realized was the point the dream had made. It had taken an Austrian colloquism and translated it into a pictorial image. This phrase, common English in ordinary speech, is Du kannst mir auf den Buckel steigen. You can climb on my back, which means I don't care what you say about me. An American equivalent, which could easily appear in a similar dream, would be go jump in the lake. One could say that this dream picture was symbolic, for it did not state the situation directly, but expressed the point indirectly by means of a metaphor that I could not at first understand. When this happens, as it so often does, it is not deliberate disguise by a dream. It simply reflects the deficiencies in our understanding of emotionally charged pictorial languages. For in our daily experience, we need to state things as accurately as possible, and we have learned to discard the trimmings of fantasy both in our language and in our thoughts, thus losing a quality that is still characteristic of the primitive mind. Most of us have consigned to the unconscious all of the fantastic psychic associations that every object or idea possesses. The primitive, on the other hand, is still aware of the psychic properties. He endows animals, plants, or stones with powers that we find strange and unacceptable. An African jungle dweller, for instance, sees a nocturnal creature by daylight and knows it to be a medicine man who has temporarily taken its shape. Or he may regard it as the bush soul or ancestral spirit of one of his tribe. A tree may play a vital part in the life of a primitive, apparently possessing for him its own soul and voice, and the man concerned will feel that he shares its fate. There are some Indians in South America who will assure you that there are red Aurora parrots, though they are well aware that they lack feathers, wings, and beaks. For in the primitive world's things do not have the same sharp boundaries they do in our rational societies. What psychologists... See you, Rad. Bon appetit. What psychologists call psychic identity, or mystical participation, has been stripped off our world of things. But it is exactly this halo of unconscious associations that gives a colorful and fantastic aspect to the primitive world. We have lost it to such a degree that we do not recognize it when we meet it again. With us, such things are kept below the threshold. When they occasionally reappear, we even insist that something is wrong. I have more than once been consulted by well-educated and intelligent people who have had peculiar dreams, fantasies, or even visions which have shocked them deeply. They have assumed that no one who is in a sound state of mind could suffer from such things, and that anyone who actually sees a vision must be pathologically disturbed. A theologian once told me that Ezekiel's visions were nothing more than morbid symptoms, and that when Moses and other prophets heard voices speaking to them, they were suffering from hallucinations. You can imagine the panic he felt when something of this kind spontaneously happened to him. We are so accustomed to the apparently rational nature of our world that we can scarcely imagine anything happening that cannot be explained by common sense. The primitive man confronted by a shock of this kind would not doubt his sanity. He would think of fetishes, spirits, or gods. Yet the emotions that affect us are just the same. In fact, the terrors that stem from our elaborate civilization may be far more threatening than those that primitive people attribute to demons. The attitude of modern civilized man sometimes reminds me of a psychotic patient in my clinic who was himself a doctor. One morning I asked him how he was. He replied he had a wonderful night, disinfecting the whole of heaven with a mercuric chloride, but that in the course of this thoroughgoing sanitary process he had found no trace of God. Here we see a neurosis or something worse. Instead of God or the fear of God, there is an anxiety neurosis or some kind of phobia. The emotion has remained the same, but its object has changed, both its name and nature for the worse. I recall a professor of philosophy who once consulted about his cancer phobia. He suffered from a compulsive conviction that he had a malignant tumor. Although nothing of the kind was ever found in dozens of X-ray pictures. "Oh, I know there is nothing," he would say, "but there might be something." What was it that produced this idea? It obviously came from a fear that was not instilled by conscious deliberation. The morbid thought suddenly overcame him, and it had a power of its own that he could not control. And it was far more difficult for this educated man to make admission of this kind than it would have been for a primitive to say that he was plagued by a ghost. The malign influence of evil spirits is at least an admissible hypothesis in a primitive culture, but it is a shattering experience for a civilized person to admit that his troubles are nothing more than a foolish prank of the imagination. The primitive phenomena of obsession has not vanished. It is the same as ever. It is only interpreted in a different and more obnoxious way. I have made several comparisons of this kind between modern and primitive man. Such comparisons, I shall show later, are essential to an understanding of the symbol-making propensities of man, and of part that dreams play in expressing them. For one finds that many dreams present images and associations that are analogous to primitive ideas, myths, and rites. These dream images were called archaic remnants by Freud. The phrase suggests that they are psychic elements surviving in the human mind from ages long ago. This point of view is characteristic of those who regard the unconscious as a mere appendix of consciousness, or more picturesquely, a trash can that collects all of the refuse of the conscious mind. Further investigation suggested to me that this attitude is untenable and should be discarded. I found that associations and images of this kind are an integral part of the unconscious and can be observed everywhere, whether the dreamer is educated or illiterate, intelligent or stupid. They are not in any sense lifeless or meaningless remnants. They still function, and they are especially valuable, as Dr. Henderson shows in a later chapter of this book, just because of their historical nature. They form a bridge between the ways which we consciously express our thoughts and a more primitive, more colorful, and pictorial form of expression. It is this form, as well as appeals directly to feeling and emotion. To be honest, I did not buy this concept until I read Anne Shulgin talk about it in Tikal. Ah, very interesting. You know, it's something that I struggled with as well. When I had experiences of vivid visions and things like that with the use of psychedelics. Yeah, I thought I was going crazy, completely bonkers, and I didn't, because there was some sort of sense to all of it, but there was also complete nonsense at the same time. That's the tricky part, right? How do you explain that? Jung has so much work around this particular aspect, what he calls divine madness, the merging of the reason and unreasonable. He believes that this creates the supreme meaning. I can't say I've seen anything that I've recognized as deeply archetypal, seen more of what I thought was nonsense. I feel that. I've seen definitely some deeply archetypal stuff. I would say a big archetype that I experience is one of singing, sinking in, and being in an ocean, being in a large body of water, floating, Um, feeling like I am being consumed by a greater whole. Um, this is like a theme, and this is like there's a symbol, like the Ouroboros symbol, which is like here in this book. I'm putting it up on the camera. Hopefully, be able to see it. This is like let me read the text. The 19th century German chemist Kekulé, researching into the molecular structure of benzene, dreamed of a snake with its tail in its mouth. This is an age-old symbol, left a representation of it from a 3rd century BC Greek manuscript. He interpreted the dream to mean that the structure was a closed carbon ring, as on the page above, from his textbook of organic chemistry in 1861. All I have been thinking about recently is that the truth exists in contradiction, and I'm sure it's true in context. Hold on, I'm gonna pop chat out real quick so that there's no longer the heart that like blocks out a little bit of. Yeah, it's better now. I'm sure that it's true in context to reason in some way too. I agree. You know, Long John Jimmy. Let me just like pull out another book for you. We're gonna put away Man and His Symbols for a second. We're gonna go freestyle today on the book club. I'm pulling out the red book. If I can find it. Red book? I recently did like a room cleaning, so like things are all over the place. I work better in chaos than I do in form. The way language works and how language requires our internal narratives to function, the truth exists on both sides of our perspectives. I entirely agree. It's always like a dialectic, I think, is like, this is what you were trying to teach me, I think. And I think I get it. I think I understand the Hegelian idea of dialectics. There's like there's a duality. Non-duality presupposes duality. They must exist together. So language is important. It is evolution. It is the way that we communicate the unconscious to the conscious, and symbolism helps with that. As for the red book, I still don't know where it is. Not there. Not over here. We're looking for a book. Welcome to Book Finding Club. How did I lose my book? My room is not that big. This is kind of funny. I think I might have to just give in to the flow of things and consider my red book lost for now. It is currently in the unconscious. And we'll just keep reading Manda's symbols. The red book will turn up, I guess, whenever it's time for the red book to turn up. And then, but I think that, Jimmy, you will find the red book to be extremely, extremely valuable. Peace. I'm super down. 100%. You DM me. I sent you a message on Discord. I replied to. We'll work something out. Alright, I'm gonna read a little bit more. Try and find like the next stopping point. If I can manage. I have made several comparisons of this kind between modern and primitive man. Such comparisons... Oh, I restore chat. Okay, we're good. Such comparisons, as I shall show later, are essential to an understanding of the symbol-making propensities of man, and of the part of dreams play in expressing them. For one finds that many dreams present images and associations that are analogous to primitive ideas, myths, and rites. These dream images are called archaic remnants by Freud. The phrase suggests that they are psychic elements surviving in the human mind from ages long ago. The point of view is characteristic of those who regard the unconscious as a mere appendix of consciousness, or more picturesquely, as a trash can that collects all the refuse of the conscious mind. Further investigation suggested to me that this attitude is untenable and should be discarded. I found that associations and images of this kind are an integral part of the unconscious and can be observed everywhere, whether the dreamer is educated or illiterate, intelligent or stupid. They are not in any sense lifeless or meaningless remnants. They still function, and they are especially valuable, as Dr. Henderson shows in a later chapter of this book, just because of their historical nature. They form a bridge between the ways in which we consciously express our thoughts and a more primitive, more colorful, and pictorial form of expression. It is this form as well that appeals directly to feeling and emotions. Those historical associations are the link between the rational world of consciousness and the world of instinct. I have already discussed the interesting contrast between the controlled thoughts we have in waking life and the wealth of imagery produced in dreams. Now you can see another reason for this difference. Because in our civilized life, we have stripped so many ideas of their emotional energy, we do not really respond to them anymore. We use such ideas in our speech, and we show a conventional reaction when others use them, but they do not make a very deep impression on us. Something more is needed to bring certain things home to us effectively to make us change our attitude and our behavior. This is what dream language does. And symbolism has so much psychic energy that we are forced to pay attention to it. There was, for instance, a lady who was well known for her stupid prejudices and her stubborn resistance to reasoned argument. One could have argued with her all night to no effect. She would have taken not the slightest notice. Her dreams, however, took a different line of approach. One night, she dreamed she was attending an important social occasion. She was greeted by the hostess with the words, "How nice that you could come. All your friends are here, and they are waiting for you." The hostess then led her to the door and opened it, and the dreamer stepped through into a cowshed. This dream language was simple enough to be understood even by a blockhead. This woman would not at first admit the point of a dream that struck so directly at her self-importance, but its message nevertheless went home. and after a time she had to accept it because she could not help seeing the self-inflicted joke. Such messages from the unconscious are of greater importance than most people realize. In our conscious life, we are exposed to all kinds of influences. Other people stimulate or depress us. Events at the office or in our social life distract us. Such things seduce us into following ways that are unsuitable to our individuality. Whether or not we are aware of the effect they have on our consciousness, it is disturbed by and exposed to them almost without defense. This is especially the case with a person whose extroverted attitude of mind lays all the emphasis upon external objects, or who harbors feelings of inferiority and doubt concerning his innermost personality. The more that consciousness is influenced by prejudices, errors, fantasies, and infantile wishes, the more the already existing gap will widen into a neurotic dissociation and lead to a more or less artificial life, far removed from healthy instincts, nature, and truth. The general function of dreams is to try to restore our psychological balance by producing dream material that reestablishes in a subtle way the total psychic equilibrium. This is what I call the complementary or compensatory role of dreams in our psychic makeup. It explains why people who have unrealistic ideas or too high in opinion of themselves, or who make grandiose plans out of proportion to their real capacities, have dreams of flying or falling. The dream compensates for the deficiencies of their personalities, and at the same time it warns them of the dangers in their present course. If the warnings of the dreams are disregarded, real accidents may take their place. The victim may fall downstairs or may have a motor accident. I remember the case of a man who was inextricably involved in a number of shady affairs. He developed an almost morbid passion for dangerous mountain climbing. As a sort of compensation, he was seeking to get above himself. In a dream one night, he saw himself stepping off the summit of a high mountain into empty space. When he told me his dream, I instantly saw his danger and tried to emphasize the warning and persuade him to restrain himself. I even told him that the dream foreshadowed his death in a mountain accident. It was in vain. 6 months later, he stepped off into space. A mountain guide watched him and a friend letting themselves down on a rope in a difficult place. The friend had found a temporary foothold on a ledge, and the dreamer was following him down. Suddenly he let go of the rope, according to the guide, as if he were jumping into the air. He fell upon his friend, and both went down and were killed. Another typical case was that of a lady who was living above herself. She was high and mighty in her daily life, but she had shocking dreams, reminding her of all sorts of unsavory things. When I uncovered them, she indignantly refused to acknowledge them. The dreams then became menacing, full of references to the walks she used to take by herself in the woods, where she indulged in soulful fantasies. I saw her danger, but she would not listen to my many warnings. Soon afterwards, she was savagely attacked in the woods by a sexual pervert, but for the intervention of some people who heard her screams, she would have been killed. There was no magic in this. What her dreams had told me was that this woman had a secret longing for such an adventure, just as the mountain climber unconsciously sought the satisfaction of finding a definite way out of his difficulties. Obviously, neither of them expected the stiff price involved. She had several broken bones, and he paid with his life. I think that's like the perfect stopping point. Because I don't think the book gets much darker than that. Thank you very much for coming. The entirety of the video will stay up on my channel. It will be on the live chat, so you'll be able to watch through, as well as the reading we did before the other day. And we will probably do this again tomorrow around the same time, 7:30, 8 o'clock. Reading Carl Jung, Man and His Symbols. Thank you for coming, and have a wonderful day.